listeners, good day. Welcome to this episode of the POSH Pod, the podcast where we talk about everything to do with the anti-sexual harassment law in India. We've been discussing a number of issues around sexual harassment, and today we'll be discussing whether there is any excuse that is a good excuse for sexual harassment. The obvious answer seems no, but let's discuss this further to see what the law actually says. With me today, Laxmi Char, who is the co-founder at Parity Consulting, an organization that deals with everything to do with inclusion at the workplace, including prevention of sexual harassment. I'm a lawyer, work with CAM, and deal a lot with clients who have issues around anti-sexual harassment laws in India. So, Laxmi, you want to get started? Tell me, what do you think about intent? Is it relevant with respect to sexual harassment law in the issues that matters that you've dealt with as an IC member?
Yeah.
Is this a common excuse that comes up, a common defense that, oh, I didn't mean it, I didn't intend it? Tell me more.
Oh, geez, yes, all the time, right? But it wasn't supposed to be taken that way. It was just a joke. Why is she the only sensitive one? The other two women with her didn't feel anything. Come on, why are you so, focused? Or why are you so paranoid about this whole, being a woman thing? So I hear it a lot, right? And some of it is also in terms of, I didn't realize that what I was saying could be misinterpreted, would be misinterpreted. There's a whole lot of stuff, right? For me, I'm very clear. The law says that it's not the intent of the person committing the act which is perceived as harassment that matters. It is the impact on the person who is receiving this act, right? So sometimes, and one very interesting, situation that I was in, where this woman came to the IC and said, I need some help. I'm not ready to make a complaint right now, but I need some help. And what was the help that she wanted? She said that in her team, there were one or two people, unfortunately including her boss, who were complimenting her on her style, her grooming, her presence and stuff. And she said, when I come to work, I don't see that as a compliment. Compliment me about the work I'm doing, the attention to detail, the way I'm able to deal with customers. Compliment me about my professional qualities, right? And that was really an interesting kind of paradigm shift for me, that a compliment is really the impact and not the intent. I'm not sure if that's something that relates to how you're reading the act or that you've advised people around.
No, absolutely. 101%. It is, the intent is not relevant. It is how the woman perceives the man's actions or the perpetrator's actions that is relevant. But interestingly, it's not only the woman's perception that matters. And I find this almost hilarious to discuss each time it comes up, that there is such a thing as a reasonable person standard as well, right? So we tell the woman, all your perception is the only thing that matters. If you think it's harassment, it's harassment.
Yes.
Then let's say there's a business meeting, man and woman shake hands, normal shake hand, woman feels that it's harassment. Okay? Are we still going to say that it's harassment because the woman perceives it to be harassment? Right? So we say that it's the only thing that matters is your perception. But then when something happens which is routine, like a handshake, which she now perceives to be harassment, we say, stop. It's not only your perception that matters. It is whether your perception fits that of a reasonable person. Right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as such. But the issue with that is the two narratives that we say are not entirely aligned. So we never qualify the fact that intent is irrelevant and perception is all that matters with it should be in line with the reasonable standard. But that is the fact. And that is also reasonable because a handshake cannot be sexual harassment, how much ever the woman may perceive it to be. Right? But we've discussed in one of the previous episodes about instead of a handshake in some countries, a kiss is a way in which you greet people. Now, depending on your social setting, you should be aware as to whether your method of greeting was appropriate or not. Right? In our example of a handshake, that's more global. But if there is a social setting where men and women don't shake hands, right, in some conservative society, for example, then you should be aware not to shake hands. Maybe in that setting, it is bordering harassment, not because you intended to be, but because you were not aware of your situation, of your surroundings. So it's, while the answer is yes, intent is not relevant, perception is all that's relevant, there is a reasonable person standard which needs to be considered as well.
So what I'm hearing you say is from an IC's perspective, right? So when we are thinking about reasonable person, we're also contextualizing that reasonable person, right? A reasonable person, how would a reasonable person behave or engage with this situation in this particular context? So to your example, if a business handshake is the normal business culture in a particular organization, then a handshake is acceptable. But if the same organization is in a different culture where a business handshake between men and women, right, is not acceptable, then the IC does have that nuance that they need to take into consideration. Now that then it's almost like questioning the foundation of the Act, right? Saying that to your point, the Act said any unwelcome gesture. Now, I might feel, and we know that, we use a phrase, my body, my rules, right? So I might feel that a particular act is unwelcome. But it is possible that in the culture I'm in, that act is not considered harassment, right? So when we think of the IC's role in prevention and prohibition, is there something the IC can do to sensitize?
Spot on, Laxmi. I think that's the answer to the question. Because the answer to the situation is not that, the woman is wrong in feeling the way she's feeling because she's feeling it, right? Now, it is the obligation of the IC and the employer to make sure that she and the people around her are sensitized to what is acceptable, what is the norm, right? We have to accept that there will be outliers, right? Despite the best intentions of the IC, of the employer, of adequate sensitization, there will be outliers who still find mundane actions to be harassment, potentially, but that's not the category of people we're talking about here, right? So yes, the answer is the IC and the employer need to sensitize employees, sensitize the IC about what amounts to harassment, what does not, with examples. I think it's very important to give examples because there is the obligation under the POSH Act to sensitize employees, right? And words like any unwelcome sexual advances don't in isolation mean enough unless you explain what exactly it means, because your employee audience also is from a wide demography. So you can't expect employees to just grasp what that means. So I think giving adequate examples, and this handshake example is a great example, I think, of possibly misunderstanding a situation, and that's not a situation you want to find yourself in. There was this other situation that I was listening to as part of an IC, and this was again a multinational organization. And there was what is normally termed as knowledge transfer, where a particular work process which was being performed for that organization in a different country was being transitioned to India. And as a result of that, we had a couple of people traveling from that home country to India. One of them was a man, and it was his first time ever outside his country. Forget about anywhere else, right? So this organization, in the spirit of this thing, had done this, cultural training and stuff like that, made sure these people had gone through it. So he comes here, and almost his very first day, when I say here, he comes to India, almost his very first day, he's in this, in the office building, and this is a multi-story office building. So he gets into the elevator. He happens to see that there's somebody else in the elevator. There are only two of them. This other woman wearing lanyard, identifying her as this thing. And he says, he smiles at her and says, "Oh, you work for such company? I do too. And I'm so excited. I'm here, my first visit to India. I've read so much about it, and I have 2 free weekends. And what do you think that I should be doing with my weekend?" And so she marches out of the elevator, goes straight to HR and says, "He's propositioning me. How dare he? I don't know him. And he's coming and talking to me about taking me away for the weekend." And that was really something which was an eye-opening conversation for many of us, that
yes, reasonably speaking, it's difficult to find fault with what that guy was doing, right?
Correct. And I mean, that's exactly the example we're talking about as well, isn't it? The sensitization required here, let's say that you are part of a company which has a global parent, global subsidiaries, you are likely to interact with people from other cultures. That's the kind of sensitization that employees need, that in some countries, the way in which men and women interact are more open, more forward potentially, and that's, I mean, I don't know if going away for a weekend as soon as you meet is normal anywhere, but I mean, I think the rest of it, is understandable. So that's a sensitization that employees need. And if the woman had been part of a couple of training sessions and know that this is how it works in some countries, maybe she wouldn't have walked out of the elevator straight and filed a complaint, right?
So in his defense, I have to say that all he was doing was to say that I've read TripAdvisor, I've read all of the other things, but as a local person, what would you recommend, right? I mean, that was his this thing, but and that's where the misinterpretation happened, the intent and impact, which is really nice. So topic for another day, Bishen, but this for us was a great opportunity, as you said, the sensitivity training and the understanding, but also in terms of experiencing the law in terms of a conciliation or a settlement conversation, because this really was a true misunderstanding, right? So when we get into that, unfortunately, there are some cases where there is nothing true about the misunderstanding, right? And in normal terms, and we talked about different cultural expectations. In India, the relationship of alcohol with gender is very dichotomous, right? We know that traditionally the expectation is, oh no, he had a couple of drinks too many, so you should forgive him. He was not in his right mind. He didn't know what he was saying. Normally, he's a very nice guy. He doesn't behave this way. And when it's the other way around, she had a couple of drinks too many. Why was she drinking? Didn't she know that if she drinks, then she's sending out X and Y and Z signals, And that's where, from an IC perspective, it's interesting for us to really parse those nuances and understand why this seems to be an accepted understanding.
If it's an accepted understanding, it's a misunderstanding. That's just not what it should be, because there is no law which says, that is to pick the title of our episode, says it's a good excuse for sexual harassment. No, there is really no good excuse for it. Alcohol is not a good excuse for it. Law doesn't allow it. And so I don't think any IC should accept alcohol consumption as, mitigating factor for someone who's alleged of committing sexual harassment.
What if he apologizes? What if he comes in front of the IC and says, I'm really sorry. I would not have behaved this way if I had known. But hey, it was a celebratory dinner.
Yeah, you say, we appreciate your apology, thank you, but you're fired.
Okay. So then, when we go into various organizations and we talk about this, we talk about, the importance of understanding boundaries and that, the onus is on me to understand your boundary and not to cross it, right?
I think it's important to just make sure that this is not a conversation that is even to be tolerated, right? It's not to be even discussed, right? There is no need to even entertain having a discussion about.
So basically you're saying I should become a robot, right? I should not be a human being. I should not, have a pleasant conversation with people. I should not crack any jokes at the workplace. I come in, I wear my blinkers, I do my work and I leave.
See, if you being your authentic self means that you are a creep, then we don't want to see your authentic self. Keep your authentic self to yourself. We don't want to see it. And there are ways to behave in the workplace without, breaching boundaries and being your authentic self. So I think employers need to make it very clear as part of sensitivity trainings that there are lines you cannot cross, and If you need to rein yourself in.
Listeners, I really want to hear from you about this whole conversation, right? This is fascinating. Thank you for being quite that honest. But, we talked about the cultural thing, about the international cultures, but we also see this cultural difference even within India, right? Different regions, different geographic realities. Again, I mean, when we go back to, how is a POSH policy constructed, what really should be an organization's philosophy behind that policy. There's one way of doing it, which is basically cut paste the act and say, okay, this is our policy, goodbye everybody. And then there's another space where it is, it's wonderful to see how the spirit behind this act is really what is driving that. It's easier for larger organizations to do that, right? It's much tougher for smaller. And when it comes to startups, honestly, this is not the priority for startups, right? They are much more focused on top line. They're which customer can I convince to sign up and where do I need to go to generate my revenue? So when we think about all of this and we think about, what is a good excuse, there is no excuse at multiple levels, right? I mean, there's no excuse at the employer's level to say that, oh, oops, sorry, we didn't think about it. We didn't think it was important. We have a very small, close-knit group. Nobody misbehaves with anybody. But, we have a complaint. And then, as you said, for the IC during deliberations, no excuse to accept this kind of thing. And for the people concerned, is this actually creating something which the Act is trying to distinguish, which is a policing mentality, right? So you're going to get penalized for what you think and say, forget about do.
But that's fair, don't Laxmi? I mean, sexual harassment is not only your actions, sexual harassment is also your words, right? And from an employer's perspective, in terms of, let's start with what you said at the beginning about setting up the policy. It's very onerous, right? There is no excuse for not complying with it. Now, the law says you must have a policy. The law doesn't say what kind of policy you must have. You can have a policy that says sexual harassment is bad, don't do it. 2 lines, and that's a compliant policy. Like, really it is. So it's not that hard to comply. I mean, I get that the angle you're coming to here is there is no excuse for, forget there is no excuse for not harassing. For harassing, there is no excuse for not complying with the act is your angle. True, there is no excuse for not complying because complying is not that hard, right? You can't say that we will deal with an issue of sexual harassment as and when it comes up because that's not what the law says. And the law requires you to what? Like you said, have a policy in place, which can be as simple as what I said. I hope it will cover more than that. But what I said is a compliant policy. And setting up an IC. Setting up an IC is not that complicated either, right? We have discussed this as well in previous episodes. It's a matter of board passing a resolution, putting it up on the notice board, and you have an IC. And hopefully you are not dealing with complaints of sexual harassment every day. I mean, if there are incidents, I hope they are being reported, but we hope the harassment is not happening. In which case, there's not that much of a burden on the company. So there is no excuse to not comply because it's not that onerous an act to comply with. And that's the fact.
And so to all of these people who come and say that, hey, this act is taking the pleasure out of my workplace interactions or is causing me to behave in an inauthentic manner, I'm going to go back to the phrase that you used, don't be a creep.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Don't be a creep.
Okay.
So with that, we come to an end of this episode. Thank you everybody for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please do like, subscribe and share your comments. We look forward to having you back on the next episode of the POSH Pod.
Thank you and bye-bye.